All right, get ready, because today we're going deep on this book. Heartwarming, How Our Inner Thermostat Made Us Human by Rocha, IJzerman.
Oh, this is a fascinating one.
It is, and it's all about this like kind of crazy connection between, our need to like stay warm and how that like actually shaped us, like human evolution and behavior and all that.
It's one of those things when you first hear it, you're like, what? But then when you start thinking about it, you're like, oh yeah, like temperature regulation is like breathing, right? Like you have to do it.
Right.
And so IJzerman's argument is that need, that very basic need, is like tied into our social instincts in ways that we don't even really realize.
Okay, so I'm picturing like emperor penguins huddling for warmth.
Right.
Like in Antarctica, that's social thermoregulation.
Right.
But how do we get from penguins to people?
Well, think about little babies, right? Like human babies. They can't regulate their own temperature.
Right.
So they have to like cuddle up to their caregiver to stay warm.
So that need for like physical closeness then becomes the foundation for like attachment and social development.
Yeah, and it sort of goes even deeper than that. Like those very earliest experiences of feeling safe and loved are tied into feeling warm.
Oh, wow.
And so IJzerman takes that idea and runs with it. He's basically arguing that this primal need for warmth actually like drove the evolution of these complex social structures in humans.
Wait, so cuddling to stay warm led to like families and communities and societies. Like how does he support that idea?
Well, he brings up some really fascinating research. And one thing that he points out is that huddling, right, it's not just about staying warm. It's also about conserving energy.
Okay.
So think about, cyclists in a peloton, right? They're all clustered together. They're drafting off each other.
Right, to minimize wind resistance.
Exactly, to save energy, right?
Okay.
And so IJzerman calls this like behavioral economizing, basically, like finding the most efficient ways to meet our needs. So if social interaction helps us regulate temperature more efficiently,
All right.
then it kind of makes sense that we'd be like driven to form these social bonds, right?
Yeah, okay. I see, I'm starting to see the connection, but it's still like a very mind-blowing concept.
It is.
Yeah.
And he doesn't stop there. He goes on to explore this idea of social thermoregulation therapy.
Okay.
Or STT.
What?
Yeah.
That's TT. Okay.
And it's basically using this understanding of social warmth to improve therapy, like relationship therapy.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Like how does that work?
So imagine like a couple, they come in for therapy and they're fitted with these sensors, right?
Yeah.
And these sensors are tracking their body temperature, their heart rate, even like how much they're sweating.
Okay.
All these indicators of like emotional arousal.
Right.
And then the therapist guides them through these exercises that are specifically designed to increase closeness and warmth.
So like holding hands or like cuddling or...
Exactly. And the cool thing is the sensors are giving them this real-time feedback.
Oh, wow.
So they can actually see like, oh, our heart rates are starting to sync up.
Wow.
Our body temperatures are rising a bit.
That's amazing.
Our stress levels are going down.
So they can actually see proof that physical touch has an impact.
It's about rewiring those emotional patterns.
Wow.
And strengthening bonds through warmth, through that feeling of warmth.
Okay.
And IJzerman, he suggests that, this STT, it can be particularly helpful for couples who are struggling with communication or, they feel that emotional distance.
Right, because it's hard to be vulnerable and open up if you feel like physically and emotionally distant.
Yeah.
But if you can create that sense of like warmth and safety, it's probably easier to connect on a deeper level.
Totally. And remember that example we talked about with the emperor penguins, where you're like huddling together. That illustrates this point so well, that sharing warmth, it's not just this like nice feeling.
Right.
It's a deeply ingrained survival mechanism.
Yeah. Okay, so like how does this whole inner thermostat thing actually like work in our brains?
Well, the key player here is the hypothalamus.
Right.
It's basically like our internal thermostat, right?
Yep.
It's constantly monitoring our core temperature, adjusting it.
Right. Yeah, I remember learning about that.
But what's fascinating is research has shown that the hypothalamus is also involved in regulating social behavior.
Really?
Yeah. So for example, studies on rodents have found that like stimulating certain areas of the hypothalamus can actually trigger maternal behaviors.
Oh, wow.
Like nest building or pup retrieval.
So the same part of the brain that tells us to put on a sweater also tells us to like go hang out with our friends.
Well, it's not quite that simple, but there's definitely a connection.
Okay. So it's not just a metaphor to say, like, we feel warm and fuzzy when we're happy. It's a real physiological thing.
Exactly, exactly. And speaking of feeling warm and fuzzy, the book also talks about this other part of the brain called the insula,
Okay.
which is, it seems to be crucial for how we experience like social touch and warmth.
So when we hug someone, our insula is firing away.
You got it.
Yeah.
It's helping us interpret that hug as pleasurable and comforting.
Oh, wow.
But it's important to note that this need for social warmth, it's not always sunshine and roses.
Yeah.
You know, the book also explores the potential downsides.
Oh, what could possibly be bad about feeling warm and fuzzy?
Well, think about it. Like this drive to connect and belong, it can make us more susceptible to things like social pressure, right?
Like conformity, peer pressure, things like that.
Exactly, yeah. Like we might go along with the crowd even if we know it's wrong just because we want to fit in.
Right.
Or we might stay in like a bad relationship because we're terrified of being alone. So while social warmth is this powerful force for good, it's important to be aware of how it can also make us vulnerable.
That's a really good point. Yeah, it seems like understanding this connection between our physical needs and our social needs can give us like a whole new level of self-awareness.
Absolutely, yeah. And that awareness can help us like navigate our social world in a more, I don't know, like conscious way.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, this is already eye-opening. I'm like noticing things now that I never really paid attention to before, like how people like naturally lean in, or touch each other's arm like during a conversation.
It's amazing how much we communicate without even like saying anything.
Right. And all this time, I just thought it was like being polite. But now I'm wondering if it goes like much, much deeper, this need for connection and warmth.
Yeah, it's definitely something to consider. But this raises another question, like what happens when we're deprived of that social warmth?
That's a good question, especially in today's world, where we're constantly connected online, but often like physically isolated.
It's a crucial question and one that we're going to explore much more deeply in the next part of our deep dive, so stay tuned for that. Welcome back to our deep dive into Heartwarming. One thing that really struck me about this book is how it challenges the way we think about emotions.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear more about that. How does IJzerman kind of change the conversation around emotions?
Well, we tend to think of emotions as, purely mental experiences, right? Like they're happening only in our heads.
Right, like there are these abstract concepts, just floating around up there.
Exactly. But IJzerman argues that emotions are much more embodied, meaning they're deeply connected to our physical sensations.
Okay.
Including our body temperature.
So it's not just a figure of speech when we say we feel like warm and fuzzy when we're happy. Like there's an actual physiological basis for that.
Exactly. Yeah. He points to studies showing how our emotions can actually influence our body temperature.
Oh.
Think about, how some people blush when they're embarrassed.
Right. Okay. But is there evidence that feeling socially connected can actually make us feel physically warmer?
There is, yeah. The book dives into this phenomenon called social buffering, which essentially means that strong social connections can help us regulate our stress response.
Okay.
And when we're less stressed, we tend to feel warmer.
So if I'm feeling stressed out, like a good chat with a friend might actually like calm my nerves and warm me up a bit.
That's the idea. And this buffering effect seems to be especially potent when it comes to feeling physically cold.
Oh, interesting.
Remember how we were talking about cuddling being a survival mechanism?
Yeah.
Well, IJzerman suggests that cuddling with a loved one on a cold night, it's not just romantic, it's actually helping us regulate our stress and stay warm.
Wow, so our need for social warmth really is deeply rooted in our biology.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about feeling good, it's about survival. But this makes me wonder, like, what happens when we don't get that social warmth? What are the implications for people who are, isolated or lonely?
Yeah, that's where things get a little bit more complex and honestly a little unsettling.
Mm.
The book explores this kind of darker side of social thermoregulation.
Okay.
And how social isolation can actually make us feel physically colder.
Wait, seriously? Like loneliness can actually lower your body temperature?
There's evidence to suggest that, yes.
Wow.
The book highlights this one study where participants were asked to recall a time when they felt socially excluded.
Yep.
And these participants actually reported feeling physically colder than those who, recalled a time they felt socially included.
That's so fascinating and kind of chilling to think about. But why would social isolation have that effect on our bodies?
Well, it seems that when we feel isolated, our bodies go into this sort of survival mode, right?
Okay.
Our blood vessels constrict, reducing blood flow to our extremities, which in turn makes us feel colder.
So it's like our bodies are trying to conserve energy because we don't have that social support that we need.
That's one way to look at it, yeah. And this physical coldness can then reinforce those feelings of emotional coldness that come with isolation.
Right.
So it creates this kind of vicious cycle.
Yeah, this is all pretty heavy stuff. I'm starting to feel a little cold myself just thinking about it. Maybe we need to shift gears and talk about some of the more positive, uplifting aspects of social thermoregulation.
Yeah, I agree. A little warmth is definitely in order. How about this? The book has a whole chapter on how social warmth can influence our perception of our physical surroundings.
Really? So our relationships can actually make our homes feel warmer.
Exactly, yeah. Research suggests that people who feel more socially connected tend to perceive their homes as physically warmer, even when the actual temperature is the same.
That's incredible. So a cozy evening with friends might actually make your living room feel like a few degrees toastier.
That's the idea, and this effect seems to be particularly strong when people are physically close to each other.
Okay, so movie night on the couch with a bunch of blankets and good company, that's the ultimate recipe for social and physical warmth. But what about people who aren't naturally cuddly or who don't have a lot of close friends? Are they just doomed to feel cold all the time?
Not at all, no. IJzerman, he dives into these fascinating individual differences in social thermoregulation.
Okay.
You know, some people are simply more sensitive to temperature changes than others.
Right, so some people might just have a higher set point for feeling warm.
Exactly. And we also can't forget about cultural differences in how people perceive and regulate temperature.
That's a good point, like how some cultures are more accustomed to colder climates than others.
Yes, that's one factor, but there are also differences in social norms around touch and physical closeness, right? Like some cultures are very comfortable with hugging and kissing as greetings, while others are much more reserved.
Right, so those cultural norms can definitely influence how people experience and express social warmth.
It's true. Ultimately, social warmth is this fascinating interplay of biology, psychology, and culture.
Right.
It's not a one-size-fits-all phenomenon.
This is also interesting, but it makes me wonder, like, are there things we can actually do to cultivate more social warmth in our lives?
Yeah.
Especially considering how important it seems to be for our well-being.
That's a fantastic question, and one that IJzerman addresses directly. He offers some really practical and insightful strategies for boosting social warmth, you know, in our daily lives and even in our communities.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Let's dive into those strategies in the next part of our deep dive. This conversation is already making me see the world in a whole new light. Okay, so we're back and ready to unpack some of these solutions. And in the last part, we were talking about how important social warmth is. And you mentioned that IJzerman actually offers some strategies for boosting it.
Right, yeah, and some of them are pretty surprising. But before we jump into those, I think it's worth revisiting that concept of social thermoregulation therapy, or STT. We touched on it briefly before, but I think it deserves a little bit more exploration.
I agree, especially because it just seems like such a direct application of this whole inner thermostat idea. So as a refresher, how would STT actually work in a therapy session?
So picture this, right? You've got a couple and they come in for relationship counseling.
Okay.
And they're fitted with these sensors, and the sensors are tracking things like their body temperature, their heart rate, even their skin conductance.
Okay, skin conductance, remind me what that is again.
Basically, it's measuring how much someone is sweating, which is a really good indicator of emotional arousal. So think of it like a lie detector test for emotions, you know? It shows how excited or stressed someone is.
Got it. Okay, so the couple is wearing these sensors, then what?
Well, the therapists, they guide the couple through these exercises that are specifically designed to increase physical closeness and warmth.
Okay.
So it could be as simple as holding hands, you know, cuddling on the couch, or even just sitting a little bit closer together.
And the sensors would show how their bodies are reacting to these actions in real time.
Exactly. So they might see that their heart rates are starting to sync up, or their body temperatures are rising slightly, or their stress levels are decreasing.
Wow.
It's like providing this concrete evidence that these, you know, seemingly small acts of physical intimacy can have a really profound impact on their emotional well-being.
It's like they're seeing the science of connection unfold right in front of their eyes. That's pretty powerful.
It is. It is. And it's not just about feeling good in the moment. You know, the idea behind STT is that by repeatedly engaging in these warming behaviors,
Right.
couples can actually start to rewire their emotional responses and ultimately strengthen their bond.
It's like physical therapy, but for relationships.
I love that analogy, yeah. And IJzerman, he believes that STT could be especially helpful for couples who are struggling with communication issues or you know, those who feel emotionally distant from each other.
Makes sense, because if you're feeling physically and emotionally cold towards someone, it's going to be that much harder to open up and be vulnerable with them.
Exactly. It all comes back to that feeling of safety and security that we were talking about earlier. You know, when we feel physically warm and comfortable, we're more likely to feel emotionally safe and secure, which makes it easier to connect on that deeper level.
So STT is one way to apply this knowledge. But what about in our everyday lives? Are there things that we can do outside of a therapist's office to boost our own social warmth?
Absolutely. Yeah. IJzerman, he talks about how our homes and even our workspaces can be designed to encourage that sense of connection and warmth.
So it's not just about cranking up the thermostat.
Right, exactly. Think about things like incorporating more natural light, using warmer colors, and creating those cozy nooks where people can, you know, gather and chat.
So those trendy coffee shops with like comfy armchairs and warm lighting, they're onto something.
They might be tapping into our need for social warmth without even realizing it.
Yeah, and this applies to workplaces as well, right? Like,
Yeah.
Imagine an office with comfortable communal spaces, lots of natural light pouring in, and plenty of opportunities for those informal interactions.
Right. It definitely sounds a lot more inviting than the typical, you know, sterile office environment with rows of cubicles.
Yeah, but wouldn't all that, like, socializing just distract people from getting their work done?
It's a common concern, but research actually suggests the opposite. When people feel more socially connected at work, they actually tend to be more productive and more engaged.
Interesting.
They're also more likely to collaborate and support each other, which leads to a more positive and creative work environment overall.
Wow, so creating a warmer, more social workplace could be a win-win for both employees and employers.
Yeah.
I'm also curious about the community aspect that you mentioned earlier. How does social warmth play into strengthening communities as a whole?
Well, IJzerman, he argues that communities, they really thrive when they offer opportunities for shared experiences, especially those that involve physical warmth and closeness. So think about things like community gardens, potlucks, or even just gathering around a bonfire.
It sounds like those experiences really create a sense of shared purpose and belonging.
Exactly. And those feelings are essential for building strong and resilient communities. And, you know, in a world that's becoming increasingly individualistic and digital, it's more important than ever to create these spaces where people can come together, connect, and quite literally feel the warmth of human connection.
This has been such a fascinating and thought-provoking deep dive. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of not just warmth, but human connection in general. What are some of the key takeaways you hope our listener will walk away with?
Well, I hope they understand just how profoundly our need for warmth has shaped who we are. From our earliest experiences as infants to the complex societies that we've built, this drive to stay warm has influenced our evolution, our psychology, and our social structures.
It's incredible to think that something as basic as temperature regulation has played such a significant role in our development as a species.
It really is. And I also hope our listener recognizes that social connection it isn't just a nice to have.
Right.
It's a fundamental human need. Just like we need food and water and shelter, we need to feel connected to others to truly thrive.
It's so easy to take those connections for granted, especially in our fast-paced digital world.
It's true, but this conversation has been a great reminder that nurturing our relationships and finding ways to connect with others should be a top priority.
Right.
It's essential for both our physical and emotional well-being.
Absolutely. And I love that this book, it doesn't just highlight the problem, it actually offers solutions. We can all actively create more warmth and connection in our own lives and in our communities.
Right.
Whether it's through small acts of physical intimacy or designing more inviting spaces or simply making that conscious effort to connect with the people around us.
That's the most important takeaway of all. We're not passive bystanders in this whole social thermoregulation game. We have agency. We can choose to create a warmer and more connected world.
And for our listener who wants to explore these ideas further, I highly recommend checking out Heartwarming, How Our Inner Thermostat Made Us Human by Rocha IJzerman. It's a fascinating read, filled with these surprising insights.
I second that. It's definitely a book that will stay with you long after you finish reading it.
Well, on that warm and fuzzy note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.